went into New York City, we went into various schools, we talked to lots of people, and we actually contacted Harvard again and said, you know what, I was wrong. I think we actually do have a good sense of what we can start doing to close these gaps. And then they called our bluff and said, okay, can you write this in 6 months? And I said, no. And they were like, great, we can't wait to see it. And that literally was how the conversation went. So we wrote it very quickly, but we're very happy with our model at the end. I don't have time to go through this. I'm just going to pick through a couple pieces. But we think that there is a lot of evidence that we have people in small pockets around the country who are finding ways to close these excellence gaps. No one has wiped it out. It's going to take a lot more than education. We don't have time to talk about poverty reduction and things like that. But we do think that there are things, many fairly low cost, that can be done that actually can help us shrink these gaps. One that I would point out, they're all interesting. Let me talk about opportunities. So I think educators the last 5 to 10 years have gotten very wise to the fact that providing great opportunities for students doesn't mean anything if you can't get there. So if you can't afford them, if you have to use public transportation to get it on a weekend, in most of this country that is not going to happen. So we've gotten much better at that. But what we're finding in several studies now is that we look at opportunities, most of us here, through a fairly middle class, upper middle class lens as Americans, which is to say, if there's an opportunity, my kid deserves it, darn it. I don't care what the opportunity is, they deserve it. Not all families have that attitude. And so in inner city Baltimore, we've had these great programs that we've been putting in place. We would provide transportation, scholarships, we made sure the students were ready for them, and they still wouldn't show up. And so we've done interviews with the parents, and quite frankly, usually a single mother or the grandmother who's taking care of them. And what they tell us is, well, I'm just not sure he or she deserves it. You know what? A lot of other studies are starting to find that. We just assume, because we would jump at it for our kids, that everyone understands that an opportunity is something that's great. If you're dealing with generational poverty, systematic discrimination, that's not often your mindset. And that's an ugly thing to have to talk about, because it's not fun, but that's something that we need to try to fix. Is to help people understand that these are opportunities that their kids, that their grandkids are ready for. Something that simple, we think, makes a huge difference. A lot of those other things are fairly obvious. So I'm going to close with just a couple more slides here. Learn from the mistakes of Chinese marathon runners. So China, how many of you have been to China? Oh, many of you. This will make total sense to you. The Chinese government, about 6-7 years ago, decided to do a secret study about what makes a nation a great nation. And one of their top conclusions was, great nations hold marathons. If you spend any time in China, you're going, yeah, I can see them concluding that. That's kind of how their bureaucracy works. So the edict went out immediately to all the regional governments. Start holding marathons and make people run in them now. Now this, if you need a clear indicator of a difference between the United States and China, if you were a marathon runner in this country and the government told you to run a marathon, most Americans would say, I'm never running again. In China, they were like, okay, tomorrow. But you know what happens when you go to run a marathon? And this is also another great thing. An American who's never trained for a marathon would get a half a mile into it and be like, all right, I did it, I'm done. Where's the local pub? I'm out of here. The Chinese stuck with it until the end. You know what the problem is? In some of these marathons, over half of the people end up hospitalized. And this is a key part. This is a key part. I didn't make it up. Front-loading matters. Bear with me for a minute here. When we create programs like AP incentive programs, where we get students who wouldn't normally take advanced placement classes to take advanced placement classes, if we haven't front-loaded, if we haven't helped them prepare for that more rigorous coursework, what's going to happen? They're going to struggle. They're going to take the AP test, which is really the reason to take the AP course, how are they going to do? Very, very poorly. And you know what? That's exactly what's happened. We didn't front load. We didn't make sure that they were ready. So when we create this high school intervention, part of that intervention should have been bringing the middle school teachers in. To say, okay, these students in 3 years need to be able to take AP US history. What can we do now to make sure that we're making up for what they didn't get earlier? And then you go to the late elementary teachers and say, okay, middle school is going to get a bit more rigorous. You need to help front load the students for that. On and on we go. I will beat this metaphor to death a little bit longer and say that when we focus on grade level proficiency, that is essentially like saying, if you get to the 3rd mile in the marathon, declare victory. And I would argue that that's not really fair. If we have a talented poor student, for example, in Kentucky or anywhere, getting them to the 3rd mile, when they have the potential to go all 26.2, is not victory. It is literally a mile marker on a much longer journey. Most of our education policy in most states in this country, almost all of them, is about getting the student to the 3rd mile marker. I encourage you, as you work on your projects, as you work with teachers and parents, think about how we can better prepare these students to get to that end of that marathon, as opposed to focusing on the 3rd mile. Some Kentucky wisdom. We've been working with Kentucky educators the past 36 hours or so. There were 2 great comments this morning. One from a superintendent. What's best for the child should drive policy, but we let policy drive what's best for the child. I sat there in the back of the room and was like, oh my gosh, we do that, don't we, sometimes? When I'm in schools, I hear people tell me all the time, well, yeah, he or she probably could use some extra help, or maybe we should accelerate them a bit, but we have this policy. Who cares? It's one kid, come on! We need to change that mindset. The second one I loved was we need to shift our goal from novice reduction to proficiency reduction. I like that one a lot too, and that was by a principal. I sat there and I thought, yeah, the goal here, again, isn't to get as many proficient students as we can. If 100% of our students are proficient, that's great. I think we have an ethical and moral responsibility to get them there. If that's where we stop, we are not harnessing all the great talents that this country provides to us. We need to do that. On that note, if I've done this correctly, there we go. Yeah.
Before we take a couple questions, and I know there will be some, you have yellow pieces of paper on your table. And we are fortunate to have a few copies of Dr. Plucker's book, Excellence Gaps in Education, that we would like to, courtesy of Dr. Plucker and Dr. Julia Roberts. And if you're interested in a copy of the book, please put your name on a yellow sheet of paper that you'll find on your table, and jot down how you might advocate for excellence in your community, and put this yellow piece of paper in a container that we have right outside the doors when you leave. And tomorrow we will draw from that container and give away the books that we have. If you're not here tomorrow and we draw your name, we will find you and we will either hand deliver or mail your book. So please give some thought to that as you're thinking about questions this evening and beginning to head out. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions for Dr. Plucker on what you've heard tonight. I think all of you know that we released a report earlier this year, Excellence with Equity. It's everybody's business. And it's clear that we're striving for excellence for our students. And Dr. Plucker's book and his research provides us, I think, more food for thought as to how we achieve that. And so with that, questions, and I see one, David.
So, I'm chair of the board in Jefferson County, which is Louisville, so our largest district, and we've got a lot of choice. We've got magnets. We've got one magnet in particular that has a sort of a STEM track, but teach anything different from any other. It aggregates the highest performing students. Are there examples of magnet programs that are using dual credit, effectively teaching to a college or a graduate school curricular level to really raise the bar for the kids who are ready to go a whole lot further, as you described?
Sounds good. There aren't a ton of examples. We've done some research on magnets and charters, and I know this sounds self-evident, but the structure doesn't matter so much as what happens within them. So when you said they're not really doing anything differently, they're just aggregating the best students, and shockingly, they're doing really well. Right? That's amazing, right? And then we usually evaluate those schools by saying, look where these kids went to college, it's amazing. Right, and as they should, if you're aggregating students who are already doing well, right? So we find this with charters. We looked at all of, say, Georgia's charter schools, no difference whatsoever whether you were attending a charter or not. Excellence doesn't change, excellence gaps don't change. Then we looked at the schools, and they're all kind of doing the same thing. So there's no, we've gotten good at the differentiation in form and giving parents choices. Most Americans think in general that's not a bad idea. We have not differentiated function. And that's what we need to do in some of these schools. That's when we're going to start to see change. That's a lot harder to do, obviously. I was in a very large urban school district. I won't name them. Let's call them Pos-Vangelis. And they were complaining about their charters. Like, no, I mean, some of our charters don't even have waiting lists. And they gave me a great example. There's a street corner in South Central LA where there's 3 charter schools. It's like a Starbucks. One on that corner, one on that corner, one on that corner. And I asked what I thought was a really simple question, which was, okay, how is their mission different? And just, I've never seen such blank looks in my life. And they were like, well, no, they all do the same thing. And I was like, you have not thought this tracing through very carefully, have you? We need to be doing different things if we want different results. And I know that sounds so incredibly obvious. Policy has not caught up to that yet, and we need to be thinking more about that.
Right here.
I was just curious what your thoughts of at what age children should be tested and decide what their track will be, if it's an AP curriculum, or should a classroom be contained and different children are broken out and given different curriculum? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a nice, simple question. There's like 16 questions embedded in it. Really good. At least 16 questions. So I'm going to exercise my prerogative to answer the one that I want to answer. How's that? I think, well, the research is very clear in the last few years. If you're going to be testing to identify talent, you have to test every child. You can't have a teacher nomination be the first screening point, because if you do that, I will tell you exactly what the student body being tested will look like, let alone what the results will be. The National Research Center in Connecticut showed this earlier this year, a really interesting study. Very talented, underrepresented minority and poor students who did score well, didn't get screened in the first screen because their teachers didn't nominate them. We've seen study after study after study just in the last year and a half. Teacher nominations are really tricky. A lot of people use teacher nominations first. Now, as a former elementary and high school teacher, I see the value in teacher nominations, because sometimes I was the only teacher who pointed at the poor black student and said, why haven't you thought about him or her? So I see the value in it. That just shouldn't be the first screen. That should be the, who did we miss with the testing screen? So I think that's critically important. You have to test everybody. I don't think you can test at one point and make those decisions. I think you need to do it periodically. New York City has decided they're going to test at kindergarten, and they're going to use national norms, and I just think they're shocked. They're shocked that their student population in those gifted programs is Asian American, white, upper income. That's exactly how they designed the program. I could have predicted almost to the decimal point what those percentages would have been. Some of this really is just stepping back in common sense too. So I didn't answer a lot of your question, but thank you.
Right here.
Dr. Plucker, this is really difficult because I'm going to reflect my lack of insight for a whole lifetime. But I come from an area where generational poverty is dominant. What on earth is the trick to flip the attitude between what my child deserves and what